Alright guys, welcome to your first video on the American Revolution. We are here to our first major war where the colonies get involved. We last left off at the end of the French and Indian War, and now we get to see the effects of that. Because we are beginning Unit 3, we have another essential question, and I want you to ponder this for a minute because remember, our essential questions have many different answers, so there is a correct answer out there in your brain. What causes a revolution? Now, you could remember something from the American Revolution, or you could just talk about what causes a revolution in general. You think about it. Keep that in your brain as we move through this unit. All right, let's start with the government in the colonies. As we talked about in the last unit, the colonies had been able to set up representative forms of government. And if we recall, the representative forms of government that we need to remember are the New England Town Meetings, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the Virginia House of Burgesses, and the Mayflower Compact. But where did they get all of these ideas from? How the heck did they know what to do, when to do it, what it should look like? And it came from, very simply, the traditions that they had observed in the English governments. They had seen the monarchy, and yes, maybe they didn't want a monarchy over in the colonies, much in part because they were already following a king, and there is no other king. But they were the king. They knew was bound to uphold the Magna Carta. And this is a document that was meant to limit the king's ability to tax the nobles. And what it said was that the king had to get consent in order to tax the people. This is going to be monumental moving forward. So the colonists are not dumb to the fact that they know that this agreement has to exist between the king and the people when it comes to especially taxes. They also were aware that there was a parliament and that there was a two-house legislature in that parliament. And that they were there to advise the king, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And this is going to become important down the road because it sparks that idea of representation and the people's participation in the government. Also, the people in America were aware that they had the ability to self-rule. Colonists were going to put up a little bit of a fight against England and that they wanted their rights protected. They argued that they were the same as the people in England and they should be treated as such. They should be allowed to be considered when it came to if they would be taxed, when they would be taxed, how much they would be taxed. Royal power over time is going to change. Under King James II, there are going to be crown-appointed governors within the colonies. Now, think of the crown-appointed governors, these royal governors, as the king's boots on the ground. The king could not be in all of the colonies at once, nor could they be concerned with what was happening exactly in the colonies while being concerned with the whole happenings of England. So these royal governors in the colonies really had to work with the colonists in real time to keep control. The Glorious Revolution is going to take place where King James II is replaced by William and Mary. When William and Mary come into power, they will sign the English Bill of Rights, something that the colonists will also envy, that they will like. The recognition of the people, again, in the government is very important to the colonists. The economic relationship between the colonists and England is very important, and we need to remember this. It is built on the idea of mercantilism. mercantilism will drive the British economy because the British wanted to minimize imports from rival empires and to drive the rivals out of the colonial markets. The way that they wanted to do this was by controlling the trade to only exist between the colonies and the British. And they enforced this by increasing duties or tax on imported goods. And they used that tax, that duty, to build up their navy, which would, again, try to keep those rival empires out. The first law that is going to reflect the idea of mercantilism is going to be the Navigation Acts. Now, this one is very easy to remember if you just think English. The Navigation Act said that only English ships with English sailors could trade with the English colonies, and that was it. No foreign ships would be coming into the harbors within the colonies, because the colonies were there to serve England, and that was it. Nobody else, because the mother country, as you can see in that picture there, is taking from the colonies gold and silver, any other raw materials, and food. They wanted to take every product that they possibly could from the colonies and use that to benefit the mother country, feed the economy of the mother country. Now we're getting closer to some causes of the revolution. The colonists are going to envy and really like the British form of government. They like the idea of due process, the fact that you get a trial and that you're innocent until proven guilty. They like that there is a jury in that trial process. They really like that there is a freedom of the press from censorship, even if that means that they are criticizing any figure in the government. They like that there is representation before taxation. They also appreciate the separation of powers among the three branches, that there is a monarch, that there is a house, two houses in parliament, and that there is a judicial branch. So they see and are very well aware of the government and the rights of the people over in England. And they also know that there is no colonial representation for them over in England. They don't like that. They say, we see what's going on and we see that we're not benefiting from it. And this is going to be a problem. It's going to compound into a bigger issue. Now, that representation, the colonists know that they should have representation. They know that they should have representation because 2/3 of colonial men owned enough land that they could vote, and they should be able to vote when it comes to English rules. So there was a standard set, and 2/3 of the colonists met that standard to be able to vote in England, but they weren't being able to do so. The political turmoil in Europe is going to turn the attention of the crown away from the colonies. When I say political turmoil, I'm saying that colonial assemblies during this time were able to increase their power while England was kind of tied up in its own business in the mainland. Colonists were kind of bullying these royal governors and weakening their power, and more power had been given to the people. And the monarch was kind of turning a blind eye. Remember that term, salutary neglect? The colonists were just allowed to increase their power, and that's fine. Most of that power was going to wealthy planters and merchants, the people that were making money for the crown, and that was okay. The colonists were rebelling against the royal governors, but at the end of the day, they were making money, so the British weren't really paying attention. As this rebellion grew and got bigger, and the colonists kind of got an attitude of, we're okay, we can do this without England. The British kind of needed to tighten that leash again, and that's where we see the higher taxes coming in. And the British say that they are allowed to raise the taxes even if the colonists don't want them because of virtual representation. Virtual representation does not mean what that picture says over there. There was no virtual reality during the time of the colonists, okay? But England is going to say, you have virtual representation. We talk about you. You're considered over in Parliament. Conversations happen about you, but you're just not physically there. In spirit, though, you are there. And that's what they mean by virtual representation. Virtually, they're represented. Physically, they are not. But the idea of the best interests of the colonies is supposedly present in Parliament. But the economic causes of the revolution say otherwise. After the French and Indian War, the debt that England had acquired had grown so large that they could not tax the colonies anymore. The British are going to say that the war was mainly fought to protect the colonies, which they're not wrong. And that's going to be their reason to increase the taxes. Remember, the French and Indian War is fought between the French and Indians on one side and the British on the other, essentially to protect the best interest of England in the colonies because they didn't want to lose the colonies. But England's going to spin it and say, we were protecting you. Without our protection, without the British muscle, you guys would have been harmed terribly. So you owe us for protecting you. And they collect. They are here to collect through taxes. So the colonists are meant to pay off the war debt through taxes such as the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act is actually going to lower the tax or duty on foreign molasses, but what it does do that really angers the colonists is put custom officers, so like customs when you go through the airport, there are going to be customs officers there checking the ships as they come in, and there are going to be courts that are set up to collect taxes, and here's the big part, prosecute smugglers. So the Sugar Act, the colonists, it's not that they were fighting the tax there, they were fighting the control that the English were putting on the colonists through those customs officials that were now going to go through all of the ships and make sure that they weren't smuggling. And the persecution of those smugglers, that's what they were angry about. It wasn't necessarily the tax on sugar, because remember, that's lowered, but it was the muscle being flexed by the crown. The Quartering Act is going to be put in place in 1765, and what this does is they are requiring colonists to provide housing to troops that are stationed in the colonies after the war. Because remember, the threat wasn't over. We still have Native Americans that are attacking British forts, and we have to protect the colonists at the end of the day. So the Quartering Act is going to put troops in the homes of colonists, and they don't really have a choice. If a redcoat showed up at your house, you had to provide a bed for them. Even if you didn't have an extra, you had to provide whatever they needed, whatever they asked for. And that's not always a pleasant thing to have somebody just showing up at your house. Now, the Stamp Act is going to be something that affects all colonists, where the Sugar Act really affected those merchants that were trading the harbors. The Quartering Act was really more commoners than it was wealthy. The Stamp Act is going to hit every different level of society. The Stamp Act put a tax in 1765 on all printed materials. This included newspapers, books, court documents, contracts, land deeds. So if you wanted to buy a newspaper, you paid a tax. If you wanted to buy a book, you paid a tax. Court documents included birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, contracts, and land deeds. These are affecting businessmen, the educated, the wealthy, and it's affecting the everyday commoners. Any paper, any paper printed material you wanted, a direct tax was put on the colonies. And this is the first one that is a direct tax on the colonists, and they are the least bit happy about it. Once these taxes are passed, the colonists will adopt that phrase that we all remember: no taxation without representation. And what they're referring to is back to Parliament, where there's supposed to be representation of every person that faces taxes. And they're saying we don't have any, which means you can't tax us. So the colonists are going to start to fight back after these taxes are put on them, which is going to lead us one step closer to the war, which is exactly where we'll pick up next time when we come back for the second video on the revolution.